In the history of warfare, there is one rule that seems absolute. You do not give your enemy the money he needs to buy the gun that he is going to shoot you with. It is simple common sense. But in 1803, the greatest bank in London decided that profit was more important than survival. They lent millions of pounds to the United States government so that the United States could pay Napoleon Bonaparte. And what did Napoleon do with that British money? He used it to build an army of 200,000 men on the coast of France, specifically designed to invade England and destroy the bank that had just paid him. This is Tom from the Collapse Log, exploring the rise and fall of empires, because behind every golden age lies a quiet decay no one sees until it is too late. We are often told that the Napoleonic Wars were a clash of nations. We are told it was the British bulldog against the French eagle. We imagine a world of clear sides where patriots fought for their flag and traitors were hanged. But if you peel back the layers of history and look at the financial ledgers, you find a much murkier reality. You find a world where capital has no country and where gold does not wear a uniform. The story of the Louisiana Purchase is usually taught as a triumph of American diplomacy. Thomas Jefferson bought a continent for pennies. It is the story of American expansion. But the real story, the one that nobody talks about, is actually a story about British corruption. It is the story of how the City of London financed its own potential destruction. To understand this insanity, we have to transport ourselves back to the spring of 1803. Europe is holding its breath. The Treaty of Amiens has created a fragile peace between Britain and France. But everyone knows it is not going to last. Napoleon Bonaparte is the first consul of France, and he is restless. He has just lost his sugar colony in Haiti to a slave revolt. He is broke. The French treasury is empty, and he knows that war with Britain is inevitable. Napoleon looks at the map and he makes a strategic calculation. He holds the Louisiana Territory, a massive distinctive stretch of land in North America. But he knows he cannot defend it. The British Navy controls the Atlantic. The moment war starts, the British will simply sail into New Orleans and take it. So he decides to sell it. He decides to liquidate this asset to raise hard cash. He wants to turn land into muskets. He wants to turn the Mississippi River into a fleet of invasion barges. He offers the territory to the American envoys, Robert Livingston and James Monroe. They are stunned. They only came to buy New Orleans, but Napoleon offers them the whole thing. The price is $15 million, or 80 million francs. It is the deal of the century. But there is a problem, a very big problem. The United States of America in 1803 is not a rich country. It is a developing nation. The federal government does not have $15 million in gold sitting in a vault. Thomas Jefferson barely has enough money to run the post office, let alone buy half a continent. So the Americans have to borrow the money. They have to issue government bonds. But who has that kind of money? Who in the world has the liquidity to lend $15 million in cash on short notice? There was only one place: London. The City of London was the financial capital of the world. It was the heart of the British Empire. It was the engine that drove the Royal Navy and the British Army. And sitting at the center of that web of finance was the banking house of Baring Brothers. Sir Francis Baring was the head of the bank. He was known as the first merchant of Europe. He was a man of immense power and immense wealth. And he saw the Louisiana deal not as a geopolitical crisis, but as a business opportunity. Here's how the deal was structured. The United States would issue bonds. Baring Brothers, along with their partners, Hope and Company in Amsterdam, would buy those bonds. They would give the United States the cash. The United States would then give that cash to Napoleon. Now pause for a moment and think about the implications of this. Sir Francis Baring knew exactly where that money was going. It was not a secret. Everyone knew that Napoleon was selling Louisiana to raise money for war. Everyone knew that Napoleon was gathering an army at Boulogne, just across the English Channel. Everyone knew that he was building thousands of flat-bottomed boats to ferry that army across to England. Napoleon had publicly declared that he intended to march on London. He had said, "I need only 3 days of fog to be master of London." And yet here was the most prominent banker in London organizing a massive loan that would put gold directly into Napoleon's pocket. Why would he do it? Why would a British subject fund the enemy of Britain? The answer lies in the philosophy of the city. To men like Francis Baring, business was separate from politics. Governments came and went, wars started and ended, but trade was eternal. Baring argued that if he didn't do the deal, someone else would. He argued that if a British bank didn't take the commission, a Dutch bank or a German bank would. He argued that it was better for British finance to control the transaction than to be cut out of it. It is the ultimate logic of the mercenary. If I don't sell the gun, someone else will, so I might as well get paid for it. But the truly shocking part is not that a banker was greedy. The shocking part is that the British government let him do it. The Prime Minister at the time was Henry Addington. He was aware of the negotiations. Baring actually asked the government for permission to proceed. He wanted to make sure he wouldn't be prosecuted for treason. and the British government said yes. Why? Why would the British government approve a loan to their mortal enemy? There are a few theories. Some historians argue that Addington was incompetent. Others argue that he thought it was better for the United States to have Louisiana than for France to keep it. He preferred a strong America to a French empire in North America. But there is a darker theory, a theory that suggests the British government was so beholden to the banking class that they couldn't say no. The City of London was the source of the government's own loans. The Prime Minister needed Baring to buy British war bonds. If he angered Baring, if he interfered with the free market, he might find the treasury empty when he needed it most. So the deal went ahead. It was a complex financial operation. The bonds were issued. Baring Brothers bought them at a discount. And then they began the process of transferring the value to Paris. They didn't just load gold onto a ship and sail it to France. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they used the international banking system. They used bills of exchange. A bill of exchange is like a sophisticated check. Baring Brothers would write a note promising to pay gold in London. Napoleon's bankers in Paris would take that note and cash it in with other merchants who owed money to London. It was a web of credit that turned American debt into French gold using British infrastructure. The money began to arrive in Paris in 1804 right as the war heated up again. Napoleon was ecstatic. He famously said, "The sale of Louisiana assures forever the power of the United States, and I have given England a maritime rival who sooner or later will humble her pride." He knew he was playing the long game, but in the short term, he cared about the cash. He took the 80 million francs and he poured it immediately into the war machine. He went to the coast of Boulogne and built a massive military city. He gathered 150,000 men, the veterans of Italy and Egypt, the core of what would become the Grande Armée. He built 2,000 invasion barges. He trained the men to board and unboard quickly. He installed massive coastal batteries to keep the British Navy away, and he paid for it all with the credit provided by Baring Brothers. Imagine the scene. A British soldier standing on the cliffs of Dover looking across the channel with a telescope. He can see the smoke of the French campfires. He can see the masts of the invasion fleet. He knows that at any moment that army might land on his beach and kill him. And the uniform of the man coming to kill him was paid for by the bank down the street in London. The irony is so thick you can choke on it. The British taxpayer was paying taxes to the British government to build ships to defend the coast. Meanwhile, the British banking system was generating profits by financing the army that was threatening the coast. It was a perfect circle of self-destruction driven by the invisible hand of the market. This event highlights a quiet decay that often happens in the late stages of a wealthy empire. The financial interests of the elite begin to decouple from the national interests of the state. In the early days of an empire, the merchant and the soldier are on the same side. They fight for the same flag. But as the empire gets richer, the financial class becomes global. They stop seeing themselves as citizens of a country and start seeing themselves as citizens of the economy. Francis Baring was a patriot in his own mind. He was a pillar of British society. But his actions were treasonous in practice. He justified it by telling himself that money is neutral. But money is not neutral. Money is energy. Money is capacity. When you give money to a dictator, you're giving him the capacity to act. The invasion of England never happened. Napoleon eventually turned his army east to fight Austria and Russia, because the British Navy ultimately secured the Channel at the Battle of Trafalgar. But that doesn't change the fact that the City of London tried to fund it, and the story gets even stranger. During the height of the war, Baring Brothers continued to handle Napoleon's accounts. They handled the payments for the United States. They paid the dividends on the American stock to European investors, including French investors. Even when British soldiers were dying fighting the French in Spain, the dividends from the Louisiana Purchase were flowing through London to Paris. The mail ships carrying the financial documents were given special passes of safe conduct. The war stopped for nothing, but it definitely didn't stop for the mail. The bankers had established a parallel reality where the war didn't exist. This creates a terrifying precedent. It established the idea that finance is above the law of conflict. We see echoes of this throughout history. We saw it in World War II when the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland continued to process gold transactions for Nazi Germany, even as German bombs were falling on London. The central bankers of Britain and Germany were still attending meetings together in Basel while their armies were slaughtering each other. We see it today in the way technology transfers happen. We see companies selling dual-use technology to rival nations. We see investment funds pouring capital into the industries of strategic competitors. The logic is always the same. If we don't do it, someone else will. It is just business. But the Baring Brothers loan is the original sin. It is the moment when the mask slipped and we saw the true face of unbridled capitalism. Napoleon understood this cynicism perfectly. He once said, "Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain." He despised them, but he used them. He knew that their greed was a lever he could pull. He knew that he could count on the British desire for profit to outweigh the British desire for survival. And he was right. If the wind had blown differently in 1804, if the French fleet had managed to decoy Nelson away for just a few days, the French army might have landed in Kent, they might have marched on London, and if they had marched into the city of London and seized the Bank of England, they would have found the ledgers recording the very loan that made their invasion possible. Sir Francis Baring died in 1810, a fabulously wealthy man. He was eulogized as a titan of industry. He never faced any consequence for funding the enemy. The Louisiana Purchase is celebrated as the making of America, and it was. It doubled the size of the United States and set it on the path to becoming a superpower. But we should remember the dirty money that made it happen. We should remember that the American West was bought with British gold channeled to a French dictator. It is a reminder that in the great game of empires, there are no clean hands. There are only transactions. And it is a warning. When a society values profit above its own survival, it has entered the phase of quiet decay. It has entered the danger zone where the elite will sell the rope to the hangman as long as the margin is high enough. The British Empire survived Napoleon. It went on to rule the world for another century. But the rot was already there. The separation between the city and the nation had begun. Napoleon lost the war. He died in exile. But the Bering Bank survived. It thrived. It continued to lend to kings and emperors and republics for another 200 years until it finally collapsed in 1995 due to the actions of a rogue trader named Nick Leeson. History has a sense of humor. The bank that survived funding Napoleon was brought down by a guy in Singapore hiding losses in an error account. But back in 1803, they were the masters of the universe. They were the men who proved that for the right price, you can buy anything, even your own enemy. Is army. The next time you hear someone say that sanctions will stop a war or that economic pressure will topple a dictator, remember the Baring loan. Remember that money is like water. It flows where it wants to go. It flows downhill towards the highest return, and it doesn't care if it has to flow through the blood of soldiers to get there. The Louisiana Purchase was not just a land deal. It was a mirror that showed the British Empire its own reflection. And what it saw was a banker counting coins while the enemy sharpened his sword. This is Tom from the Collapse Log. We like to think that loyalty matters. But in the end, the only thing that truly commands loyalty in the halls of power is the compound interest.